Environmental Consultation for Westminster, Maryland. Climate Change Action Plan for Westminster and Carroll County, Maryland. Hello everyone, I'm Hunter Smith, and I am an intern at the Environmental Consulting Company in Westminster, Maryland. My company received a contract from the local government here to develop an action plan for understanding the effect of climate change and how it will have effect on our community and how it may be mitigated. I know that most people here are not experts on the technical/scientific nature of my work, so my goal is to inform everyone using science-backed data about what climate change is, how climate change in our geographic area is, and then what the possible impacts of climate change may be on our communities and or our lives. As we all know, Carroll County and the Westminster area are still very agricultural places. Carroll County has an $87 million market share of agricultural products from hay, soybeans, corn, wheat, beef, and dairy cows as the main producing market here. There are more than 708 farms encompassing over 76,500 acres as of June 2021. A look at agriculture in Carroll County. Carroll County, Maryland boasts a rich agricultural heritage. Farming and agribusiness are woven into every aspect of the county, from the rural working landscapes cherished by the public to their significant contribution to the county's economy, jobs, and revenues. Carroll's goal is to permanently preserve at least 100,000 acres of agricultural land. Climate change in Maryland. A focus on Carroll County and Westminster, Maryland. Maryland's climate warmed after the peak of the last ice age 20,000 years ago, but has relatively stable for the past 6,000 years. Due to longer growing seasons, more crops will be able to be produced. Milder winters in the area coupled with longer summers will mean that there are more emissions from farm equipment, cattle, and chickens, all things that contribute to the greenhouse gases. Farm equipment puts out fumes from combustion engines, and animals produce feces, which in turn puts more methane in the atmosphere that creates CO2. The extra heat will in turn take its toll on milk production and chickens, because they will no longer be able to tolerate the high temperatures. This impact will drive the prices of commodities such as milk, eggs, cheese, and etc. Carroll County is still one of the largest agricultural counties in the state. Increases in all-over temperature could mean that there will have to be change in what types of crops are grown and when. For example, corn needs a certain amount of rain to grow, and too much heat would make it wither on the stalk. Orchard trees need water to produce fruit, and drought or too much heat can have an adverse impact on the trees. Unhealthy trees attract pests and disease. Climate change refers to long-term shift in temperatures, weather, and weather patterns. These shifts may be natural, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, which produces heat-trapping gases. Forcing agents for climate. One forcing change is greenhouse effect. It's when greenhouse gases that come from the Earth's surface go up to the atmosphere and get trapped by the greenhouse layer. The other one is aerosols, and it is seen as dust, smoke, and a haze, but it is very radiative and climate changing. Historical context of climate change. Maryland's climate is trending towards warmer and wetter conditions with more extreme weather events. Temperatures have already risen about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and the number of very hot days has increased. Average annual precipitation has also increased, and the precipitation events are projected to increase in frequency and intensity. In addition, seasons are becoming less distinct, with milder winters and sea levels continuing to rise. As you can see, there are two charts showing the historical rise of temperature over Carroll County and Westminster, Maryland. Historical context of climate. Maryland's climate has been variable but stable for several thousand years. The sea level in Maryland has risen approximately 1 foot during the 20th century. Higher temperatures are more likely to cause more health problems and even death. Temperature is projected to increase substantially, especially under higher emissions. The average temperature is projected to increase by about 3 degrees by mid-century and is likely unavoidable. The amount of warming later in the century is dependent on the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions, with summer temperatures projected to increase by as much as 9 degrees and heat waves extending throughout most summers. And then it shows 2 charts of the heat rise over the next 100 years. Regional and environmental influence. The economic impacts of climate change on Maryland will depend on the exact physical changes that manifest. Although there is a degree of uncertainty, the consensus scientific literature agrees that annual average temperatures will increase by 3 to 8 degrees annually. Annual precipitation will increase by roughly 20%, and there will be more frequent and intense late winter storms. Sea levels will rise by 24 to 48 inches in Maryland and throughout this century. The physical changes that develop will significantly alter the state's coastline, beachfront, agricultural productivity, species biodiversity, weather patterns, and other factors that are tightly correlated with economic conditions. Another crucial factor dictating how the economic impacts of the climate change play in Maryland is population growth and development. As Maryland's population grows by 20% between now and 2020, and as the state's GDP grows at a rate between 60 to 70%, economic losses from climate change will run in parallel. By becoming a more populated, developed, and economically interconnected state, there will be more avenues for direct and indirect effects of climate change to impact the state. The growing and interconnected nature of the state could potentially make it more vulnerable to the cascade effects of climate change if there isn't a strong enough effort to simulate resilient and robust economy that can cope with the expected impacts of climate change. Regional and environmental influence. Shown here is more information related just to Carroll County and the climate outlook for the residents of the communities there. This document looks at the impacts on human health, stream health, and flooding concerns. According to the fact sheet, future climate will depend in part on the efforts that we take today to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from the burning of fossil fuels. The fact sheet presents 2 scenarios of future climate change based on a combination of climate models scaled to Carroll County. And as you can see, between 1960 to 2020, the gradual rise of emissions in Maryland. Socioeconomic impact. The agricultural sector is likely to experience uneven impacts throughout the country. Initial economic gains from altered growing conditions will likely be lost as temperatures continue to rise. Regional droughts, water shortages, as well as an excess of precipitation and spread of pest and disease will negatively impact agriculture in most regions. Current energy supply and demand equilibrium will be disrupted as electricity consumption climbs when demand grows in the peak summer months. At the same time, delivering adequate supply of electricity may become more expensive because of the extreme weather events. Increase in the incidence of asthma, heat-related diseases, and other respiratory ailments may result from climate change affecting human health and well-being. Another bullet point is the reliability of water supply networks may be compromised, influencing agricultural production as well as availability of water to household and industrial uses. Climate change impacts will place immense strains on public sector budgets, and lastly, secondary effects of climate impacts can include higher prices, reduced income, and job losses. Possible mitigation actions. As a way to slow down climate change, you could take the steps to put in solar panels, wind turbines, planting trees, and creating stream buffers. A future outlook for the area. Future scenarios of climate will depend in part on the effects that we take today to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from the burning of fossil fuels. This fact sheet presents two scenarios of future climate based on a combination of climate models scaled to Carroll County. The first scenario, a higher emissions scenario, assumes continued increase of fossil fuels emissions with no mitigation. The second, a lower emissions scenario, is a scenario where we tackle the issue of emissions head-on by responsibly using our natural resources and implementing strategies that begin to reduce global fossil fuels emissions by 2050, stabilizing carbon dioxide concentrations before 2100. And as you can see, the plan that we would try to take to eliminate the overuse of fossil fuels between 2020 and 2050 and on. In conclusion, as we begin to quantify the potential impacts of climate change and the cost of inaction, the following lessons are learned. First, there are already considerable costs to society associated with infrastructures, agricultural practices, land use choices, transportation, and consumptive behaviors that are not in sync with the past and current climate conditions. These costs are likely to increase as climate change accelerates over the century to come. Second, while some of the benefits from climate change may occur to individual farm and businesses, the cost of dealing with adverse climate impacts are typically borne by society as a whole. These costs to society will not be uniformly distributed, but felt most among small businesses and farms, the elderly, and socially marginalized groups. Third, benefits from climate change may be fleeting. For example, climate does not stop to change once a farm benefited from temporarily improved growing conditions. In contrast, costs of inaction are likely to stay and to increase. The effort and resources required for an integrative approach likely pale in comparison to the cost of inaction. And thank you for following along with my presentation.